Good afternoon, my name is Josh from CyclonesOZ, and here is your detailed afternoon update on Tropical Cyclone Alfred, currently raging out in the Coral Sea at this time. This is a severe tropical cyclone, Category 3 strength status here achieved by Tropical Cyclone Alfred overnight, and it's expected to continue intensifying over the next couple of days. We're going to be talking all things forecast, landfall chances, and impacts along the Queensland coastline in this afternoon's update. If you are brand new to the channel, please consider subscribing and also leave a like on the video while you're at it. Let's just get stuck straight into things with the immediate forecast and analysis of Tropical Cyclone Alfred before we talk about those landfall chances across Queensland. Let's see the cyclone right now. As you can see on the satellite imagery, it is looking really impressive right now. Plenty of good convection blowing up around the centre of circulation. It looks like an eye is now really beginning to form here, just towards the south of the main blobs of this convection here. So whilst it is a very organised tropical cyclone, it is definitely struggling a little bit with wind shear right now, which is impacting the storm structure and making this slightly harder for this cyclone to intensify quite rapidly. But nonetheless, it's a very impressive tropical cyclone here, and I think it's deserving of nearly Category 4 status here. And again, I would not be surprised if it got to Category 4 status. I talked about this in this morning's forecast update. I do reckon that this will get upgraded to a Category 4, even though no major forecast models are really suggesting it. But just having a look at the system right now, especially on the infrared satellite imagery, which shows us just how cold those cloud tops are and to a degree, how impressive those thunderstorms are and how deep the thunderstorms dive up into the atmosphere. You can see that this tropical cyclone has some really intense thunderstorms rotating around its centre, which is why I wouldn't be surprised if this got up towards Category 4 strength severe tropical cyclone status. Again, that doesn't really have a major bearing on the track and the forecast of this system here. If it gets to Category 4 status or not, it doesn't really matter, and it won't change the impacts expected on Queensland. And speaking of those impacts, let's just dive straight into the forecast right now. You can see that the tropical cyclone over the next couple of hours is expected to continue heading in that southerly motion. You can see, especially throughout the remainder of today, it's expected to move south at quite a good pace, to be honest, at around 10 to 12 kilometres an hour. It'll reach its peak intensity by around tomorrow morning, around lunchtime actually, tomorrow by the looks of things, local time, before a plateau in intensity is expected, and then some steady weakening is expected through Friday night into Saturday morning. By Friday night into Saturday morning, we're going to see Tropical Cyclone Alfred take a little bit of a turn towards the Queensland coastline. So if you're looking at the radar imagery or the satellite imagery from this tropical cyclone, and the good news is it should come into the Rockhampton radar range by late Saturday morning, you're going to see that this tropical cyclone is approaching the Queensland coastline, but don't be fooled. This is just a little bit of a curve in the track that's expected. I don't want anyone to be panicking when this system does make that turn towards the Queensland coastline. I imagine a lot of the news agencies are going to pounce on that and say the landfall is now imminent. I've seen a lot of crap on social media from it, so again, I'm not looking forward to that, but you will see this tropical cyclone move towards the Queensland coastline on Saturday morning. But look at this. Later on Saturday night, we're expecting this system to then curve away and through Sunday move further away from the Queensland coastline, weakening off at the same time. I'm very keen to see the weather observations and the wind observations on both Frederick and Caddo Island, or Frederick Reef and Caddo Island here. I'm expecting these wind observations to get well up into the 100km/h range, probably up to about 150 km/h on Caddo Island, especially on Sunday as this tropical cyclone moves close to it. It's going to be a strong tropical cyclone impact, so it's a good thing that these islands are uninhabited, but it looks like there's going to be some significant damage to the weather stations and any infrastructure on those islands as well. Along the Queensland coastline, expecting gales to pipe up anywhere between Ogmore down through Yeppoon, down through Rockhampton rather, along the coastline, and then through Agnes Water and Gladstone down to Bundaberg, and then on the eastern side of Fraser Island, expecting gale force winds to pipe up from tomorrow night, and they'll continue and persist right through Saturday. They will be at their strongest through Saturday afternoon and into Saturday evening before temporarily weakening throughout Sunday by the looks of things, then pretty much clearing out right through Sunday and into Monday morning as this tropical cyclone moves away from the Queensland coastline. At this point, that's kind of the only major impacts, or not even major, but they're the only tangible impacts that I can see, at least on the forecast for the Queensland coastline at this time, with exposed coastal locations such as Yeppoon, Gladstone, then down towards Fraser Island, and even Bundaberg expecting brief periods of gale force winds and extended periods of gale force winds expected on Fraser Island. Wind gusts shouldn't exceed 95 km/h. They definitely won't get up to about 100 km/h on the coastline unless you live in a very elevated area. So again, today is definitely a good day to be using to prepare for these sort of winds. So pruning out down the garden, any loose limbs that are hanging over the house, getting rid of them. Professionally, of course, it's just a very good idea to get that stuff kind of squared away today before these winds pipe up by tomorrow evening, and there'll be high demand for services like that as well. So get in early. I know it's not too much notice anymore, and it's not the most urgent thing either. I mean, if you can't get anyone, it's not the end of the world, but it's just a situation of be safe rather than be sorry in the end from this tropical cyclone here. And whilst impacts are not expected to be significant along the Queensland coastline, it's always much better to be prepared. And if a tropical cyclone does go for Queensland in a month's time, which considering the long-range forecast is not entirely entirely impossible at this time. I don't want to be panicking people, of course, but we're still in the midst of cyclone season. At least you've got your garden pruned early and ready for that tropical cyclone if it does happen. You really can't go wrong by getting the garden ready for a tropical cyclone event like this, even though it's going to be well off the coast and really not providing too much in the way of significant impacts. Waves are also going to be quite high along the Queensland coastline. This is something that not a lot of people have talked about. While some of those Coral Sea Islands will protect it, especially the Whitsundays, from significant wave heights, you can see through Sunday morning well offshore these waves are approaching 8 to 9 metres in height here, very high indeed. And then even down towards the coastline here along Fraser Island, seas will be between 4 and 6 metres on Fraser Island. So again, swimming, boating, fishing, any type of shore-based activity through this weekend and into early next week, absolutely not recommended at all along the central and the north Sunshine Coast coastlines. Anywhere south of Mackay, down through the Whitsundays, through Rockhampton, Agnes Water, Gladstone, Bundaberg, Fraser Island, those sort of areas, and then down towards the Sunshine Coast, any shore-based activity absolutely not recommended at all throughout this weekend and even in towards early next week as this tropical cyclone moves away from the Queensland coastline. It's going to be quite a significant one, that's for sure. It's going to be very powerful offshore from the Queensland coastline. It's certainly one to be taking very seriously, and again, don't take any chances when you're dealing with a tropical cyclone of this magnitude, that's for sure. I think that goes without saying in an event like this. Even though it's going to be well offshore, the impacts will still be felt along the Queensland coastline. Whilst the brunt of the storm is not going to be going for the Queensland coastline, it is still going to feel like a tropical cyclone is offshore. Just before I jump into a little bit more of a wacky forecast from the GFS forecast model, I would just like to explain what's driving this system here and why we've had that massive change away from the landfall, which, by the way, is not going to happen. I don't think I've said that in this video so far, so I'm going to add that in at the start. What is driving the fact that this system is not going to make that landfall is this high pressure ridge. Now, this high pressure ridge down in the Tasman Sea over the top of New Zealand is strengthening throughout today and into tomorrow, and that's why throughout the early parts of this weekend, especially on Saturday morning, we're expecting this system to take a little jog towards the Queensland coastline. It's going to be driven that way by a high pressure ridge. We're then going to see a low-pressure system move through the Tasman Sea on Saturday morning into Saturday night, which is going to bring some blustery winds to Tasmania and New Zealand. That's going to drag this tropical cyclone through that high-pressure ridge and then drag it down into the Tasman Sea, where it will meet a demise down there. That's known as the graveyard for tropical cyclones. No tropical cyclone makes it past Lord Howe Island or Norfolk Island before becoming an extratropical low, and you can see moving down into the Tasman Sea at this time here throughout early parts of next weekend being dragged, next week rather, being dragged down by that strong frontal system before that high pressure ridge builds once again. Now, if we saw a high pressure ridge here throughout early parts of next week, we would see this tropical cyclone driven into the Queensland coastline, but that's not going to happen anymore. And whilst the chance is that the high pressure ridge will build, it's not going to have enough time to strengthen, which means that there's literally a 0% chance of landfall into the first couple of days of March along the Queensland coastline. And why did I say a 0% chance of landfall in the first couple of days instead of saying a 0% chance of landfall at all? Well, unfortunately, as a forecaster, we've still got to take every forecast model into consideration here. And the GFS, which has been a load of junk so far for Tropical Cyclone Alfred, and I'm embarrassed that I've put my money on the forecast for the last couple of days, is now back, calling for that Queensland landfall. It's calling for the Tropical Cyclone Alfred to hug the Queensland coastline through this weekend and into early next week before swinging into the Sunshine Coast and up towards Bundaberg through around mid next week, Wednesday or Thursday. And whilst it isn't entirely impossible that this forecast scenario happens, it also can't be written off as impossible at this time. I'd be giving this maybe a 1 or 2% chance of occurring, so there is still that really slim chance of a landfall south of Bundaberg, but it's really not even worth airtime, and I'm only saying this to make sure that everybody is informed and understands every aspect of the forecast. My personal opinion on this is that this is just a load of boogies, and it's not going to happen here. The GFS doesn't know what it's talking about, and it has been a terrible forecast model for Tropical Cyclone Alfred so far, and it really hasn't nailed any aspect of Tropical Cyclone Alfred's forecast over the last couple of days. In fact, it really missed the landfall forecast, that's for sure, and it's caused a lot of headache for forecasters, and considering every other major forecast model is calling for the system to remain well out to sea, the Icon model, the Eastern Bear, the Access, and even smaller forecast models as well that windy.com doesn't have access to, they're all saying that for this tropical cyclone to remain well out to sea. All the model ensembles say that it's going to remain well out to sea, so I really don't see a world where this swings into the Sunshine Coast, and you need a really strong high pressure system down in the Tasman Sea to direct it, and I just don't see that happening. So the chances of a landfall on Queensland, they're close to zero, they're not exactly zero, but for all intents and purposes, it is a 0% chance of landfall on Queensland. I hope that hasn't left anybody's head scrambled. I just want to repeat that for all intents and purposes right now, that is a 0% chance of a tropical cyclone or tropical low landfall on Queensland. Again, that's not to say that there won't be impacts along the Queensland coastline. Like I said, strong winds, isolated periods of heavy rainfall along the coastline between Yeppoon down towards Bundaberg. There is always that chance there over the next couple of days. But again, no significant tropical cyclone impacts can be expected. And you can see even at a worst case scenario, it really isn't much in the way of rainfall either, or much in the way of impacts. You can see a couple of 100 millimetres here for the Sunshine Coast, which would be much needed rainfall. Again, that and spread over a couple of days as well, whilst that would cause some flooding here and there. Even the worst case scenario is not a problematic scenario at this time, and I would just like to stress that it is not going to be the end of the world even if this system does go into the southeast corner of Queensland, which, might I say again, is extremely unlikely at this time. But yeah, Tropical Cyclone Alfred certainly giving us a show over here in the Coral Sea, and you can see just in the couple of minutes it's taken me to analyse the forecast of this system, it's really blown out that eye wall quite nicely here. You can see a defined eye in the centre of the circulation here, with very nice convection now wrapping out around it with some lightning strikes in it. That means that there's some very intense thunderstorms around the centre of this storm right now. This is an impressive tropical cyclone, definitely on the cusp of becoming a Category 4 strength severe tropical cyclone. Thankfully, all these videos have been on time, and I've never called a tropical cyclone early here so far from Tropical Cyclone Alfred, but I do have a feeling that by the time this video comes out, it will get upgraded to a Category 4 strength severe tropical cyclone. Again, no real threat to the Queensland coastline. Let's talk about how to prepare and what impacts we're expecting. I know we've already talked about those impacts, but let's really hammer it down and into detail as well for those on the South Central and into the Sunshine Coast as well for Queensland. In terms of how to prepare for this tropical cyclone, just make sure you've got plenty of water. There is, of course, the chance of power cuts from this tropical cyclone as it approaches the Queensland coastline through Saturday and Sunday, so have plenty of water ready. Make sure you've got your refrigerators working, canned food supplies as well. If you've already bought them, that's always a good thing, but you definitely don't need to go out and stock yourself up for a tropical cyclone at this time. It's highly unlikely that you receive significant tropical cyclone impacts from this system here, and certainly nothing in the way of being cut off for multiple days, so you don't need to prepare for that. But I'd expect Saturday and Sunday to be both inside days. It'll be certainly much more pleasant on the inside of your house throughout the South Central Queensland coastline as well, so just make sure you've got a case of beer ready to enjoy this tropical cyclone as it comes through. Certainly the Queensland way to do it, that's for sure. Have a case of beer ready for this tropical cyclone. It's going to be more fun than it will be scary, that's for sure. But again, strong winds could bring those power lines down, so if you've got a working generator, just make sure that that's plugged into the house and ready to roll, considering the fact that there is a chance that some locations might lose power and you might be stuck in a hot, humid house, which would not be ideal for a tropical cyclone event like this, and certainly not ideal for your case of beers. This tropical cyclone here, need I say more, it's not a significant impact, and it's not expected to be a significant impact as well. And even though other forecast models have been suggesting this over the last couple of days, I just need to hammer home the fact that this tropical cyclone is not going to hammer Queensland like it was once expected. The reason why we were expecting that was because of that high pressure ridge, the fact that the GFS has a very good track record across parts of Queensland, especially up in North Queensland with tropical cyclone tracks. I can think of more cases where the GFS has nailed tropical cyclone tracks in the Coral Sea than it hasn't, and that's saying something, considering Coral Sea tropical lows and tropical cyclones are notoriously some of the hardest storms in the world to predict, and to predict with any accuracy beyond about 4 days is incredible, and we haven't been able to do that with Tropical Cyclone Alfred. It has been an absolute pest of a system, but finally we do have those answers. So don't let anybody tell you that we don't have answers here and it's still going to go for the Queensland coastline. We have definitive answers at this time that it's not going to be making that landfall like we once thought around the Rockhampton or Yeppoon area throughout the next couple of days. And again, the chances of a landfall on the Sunshine Coast are incredibly slim, and I imagine they'll get cancelled out in the next forecast run as well. But yeah, Tropical Cyclone Alfred putting on a show for us, making the most of its very warm sea temperatures and favourable atmospheric conditions right now. Need I say much more on this system here? It is very impressive indeed, and I'm loving the appearance on satellite imagery, and to be honest, it's now becoming a very fun storm to track here. It's interesting, it's throwing us plenty of curveballs, and considering the fact that it's not expected to be a significant impact for Queensland, it certainly is more entertaining than it is a scary situation here. So again, play it safe in Queensland, make sure you are aware, make sure you are in the know with this tropical cyclone here. It could still be an impact here and there along the coastline, especially if you live in an exposed location. You could be averaging wind gusts of around 90 to 100 kilometers an hour throughout this weekend for an extended period of time, so it's not going to be nothing, but again, it's going to be more exciting, I imagine, for the majority of people than it will be a scary tropical cyclone. Of course, any questions or comments on this tropical cyclone, send them through to me on Messenger, or make sure you leave them in the comment section down below. I'm reading every comment, I'm adding the input and the feedback to every single video update, and I do hope that people are seeing that and appreciating appreciating it. So again, thank you so much for all of the recent support on the channel. It has been much appreciated. Click the join button down below if you want to get access to some exclusive perks as a channel sponsor. It's the only financial way to support the CyclonesOZ channel, and it's the reason why we've got access to windy.com and the fancy software that I use to make these videos. So again, a big thank you to all of the channel sponsors. Their names are on screen right now. And again, it is true, I could not run this show without them, and their support is much appreciated. But that is all from me today on a special update for Tropical Cyclone Alfred. More to come soon, more to come tomorrow, and I'll catch you all in the next storm. Goodbye.